CPGB-ML Communist Party, Great Britain of Marxist-Leninism, and with the Revolution.
Thank you, comrades. I know it's been a long day, but we're almost there. First, I'd like to say thank you to all the organisers of the conference, all the attendees. It's been amazing. Your speeches, your contributions have been incredible. I normally attend conferences that are not at such a high level of theoretical knowledge, of clarity of action, so it's been amazing. I have to apologise for not wearing a shirt as requested. I thought it more appropriate and meaningful to wear a shirt of the International Brigades. Britain sent 2,300 volunteers to fight against the fascists in Spain. The brigade was actually called the Saklavala Brigade, named after Shanjibor Saklavala, one of the first communist British members of Parliament. More than half of those volunteers were communists. Most of them were workers who were gainfully employed at home. They risked, and many of them gave their lives, their comfort, in the spirit of international solidarity, to fight against injustice, to fight against inhumanity. We're at the Anti-Imperialist and Anti-Fascist Forum, but as communists we're not just against things. We're not just anti-imperialist, we are pro-socialist. We are not just anti-fascist, we are pro-humanity. Anti-fascism must be anti-imperialist. It is no secret that the imperialist nations, the USA in particular, face drastically deepening economic crises. The current economic bubble, driven by the growth of AI infrastructure and technology, threatens to be several times larger than the bubble that led to the 2008 financial crisis. The respite that the imperialist economies gained from the destruction and subsequent plundering of the socialist nations of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union was short-lived. The continued cannibalisation of social welfare and the public sector in the imperialist nations cannot save monopoly capitalism, any more than a sieve can bail out a sinking ship. It is because of these deepening crises that the bourgeoisie in the imperialist nations begin to openly look again to fascism, to save them from the masses of workers at home and the forces of national liberation fighting against neo-colonial exploitation abroad. It is of vital importance that we understand our class enemy, the bourgeoisie, and the forces it brings to bear against the working class in our struggle for emancipation, and understand how to mobilise the masses for the cause of humanity rather than capital. While World War II pitted the dominant imperialist nations against German, Italian and Japanese fascism, there is no doubt that the bourgeoisie of those same nations would have preferred fascism rather than socialist revolutions at home. Imperialist designs on Ukraine have seen the most recent rehabilitation of Nazi collaborators and neo-Nazi organisations who were kept in reserve in the West and underground in Ukraine until the destruction of socialism and the creation of an independent Ukraine, independent as long as it served imperialist interests and was not too friendly to Russia. Brigades of far-right and fascist soldiers, policemen and political activists were unleashed during the US-backed Maidan coup in 2014. In another theatre of war, the Middle East, imperialism primarily sponsors two kinds of fascism: Wahhabism and Zionism. Wahhabi fundamentalists have long been used as frontline proxies to assault socialist movements and nations that have gained their independence from the imperialists, from Afghanistan to Mali. In 2012, Jake Sullivan, then an official in the US Department of State, later the National Security Advisor to Joe Biden, told Hillary Clinton that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Much like in Libya, the NATO imperialists supported the most backward, reactionary forces of the Free Syrian Army, a mishmash of constantly rebranded terrorist groups with Western PR and arms deliveries. Zionism has been the favoured form of fascism in the Middle East because it is entirely dependent on imperialist sponsorship for its survival. It is therefore more effective and defendable than Islamic fundamentalism, which has had to compete with popular nationalist and socialist movements for followers, and which has also, albeit superficially, had to present itself as being in opposition to the Western imperialist cultures. This in turn makes it incredibly unpopular in the imperialist nations that nevertheless sponsor it. Settler colonial Zionism, on the other hand, functions as a little loyal Jewish ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism, as Ronald Storrs, then British government of Jerusalem from 1917 to 26, succinctly put it on behalf of the imperialists. The criminality and brutality of the Zionist regime is undeniable to anyone willing to see it, and even those unwilling. The relentless imperialist propaganda cannot hide the fact that Israel is a fascist settler colonial state that inculcates its citizens with the belief in Jewish supremacy, so they will be prepared to oppress, rape, expel, and murder Palestinians on a mass scale. This supremacist ideology is now causing issues for imperialist propagandists. While they try to claim that Israel is the only free, secular democracy in the Middle East, the Zionists passed laws proclaiming Israel as an exclusively Jewish state, defend torture and rape in their parliament, and encourage illegal settlements. A significant proportion of the Jewish Israeli population supports the expulsion of the entire remaining population of Gaza and the ethnic cleansing of the whole of historic Palestine. In the NATO imperialist homelands, governments have been eroding the veneer of freedom and democracy they claim to uphold, preparing the state apparatus to be more effective at directly repressing their own citizenry. While this may not be fascism yet, it is setting the stage for the open terrorist dictatorship of the most reactionary, most chauvinist, most imperialist elements of finance capital, the definition of fascism adopted by the Communist International. Much of this is being done to suppress the growing dissent against support of and their direct involvement in the genocidal Zionist project. The current British government sold £127 million of military equipment to Israel in the last 3 months of 2024, and is currently considering Israeli weapons firm Elbit Systems for a £2 billion contract to train the British Armed Forces. Palestine Action, a peaceful direct action group which the Labour Party prescribed as a terrorist organisation earlier this year, primarily targeted Elbit Systems facilities in the UK. To misdirect workers from their class envy, all of the Western imperialist governments are increasingly scapegoating migrants, illegal or legal, as well as other groups of workers based on ethnicity, race, or any number of cultural differences. The current US government has increased the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency's annual budget from $8.7 billion to $27.7 billion. This budget has been used to build bigger detention centres, i.e. concentration camps, and hire more enforcers to raid workplaces, homes, and snatch people off the streets across the country. The imperialists also need pretexts for foreign intervention and invasions, coups, and direct military action. For much of the 20th century, owing to the influence of the Soviet Union and other socialist nations, this was, under a, albeit feeble, pretext of spreading freedom, democracy, and human rights. Now that the old lies are wearing thin, the imperialists are exposing themselves more and more often by dropping the facade and revealing the truth. They intervene to control resources, markets, and to defend their monopolies. Recently, the USA has ramped up its aggression towards Venezuela, ordering extrajudicial executions of people on boats that they had claimed, with no evidence, were smuggling drugs. Echoing the usage of anti-terrorism legislation in the UK, Trump has ordered that criminal gangs be classified as terrorist organisations. In a clearly imperialist-directed event, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Maria Corina Machado, the next Juan Guaido, who has had links with the USA for decades via the National Endowment for Democracy, an organisation that funds and promotes US imperialist interests and regime change operations around the world. The USA is clearly still working hand in glove with Machado as she hopes the renewed aggression based on the false claims of fighting drug trafficking, including ludicrous propaganda such as President Nicolas Maduro being the leader of a gang, will help her instigate a coup in the country. It is no coincidence that she's also a supporter not just of Israel generally, but specifically of the Likud party and its war criminal leader Benjamin Netanyahu. Just 1 week after receiving her Peace Prize, she called Netanyahu to congratulate him on his achievements in war. You couldn't make that up, could you? Thanks to the mass mobilisation of Venezuelan workers and peasants, the USA's regime change plans are unlikely to succeed. I'd now like to revise that sentence, having visited Venezuela, having visited the communes, having seen the people. Thanks to the mass mobilisation of Venezuelan workers and peasants, the USA's regime plans are unable to succeed. They are impossible. But if such reactionary forces were to gain control of part or all of the country, however, what would follow would certainly be murderous fascism in the vein of Pinochet's Chile and the complete subordination of Venezuela to US imperialism. As Trump orders the CIA to target President Maduro and the Venezuelan government, we should all remember his clumsy words regarding the Syrian oil fields. We want to keep the oil. To conclude, fascism is the last resort of the bourgeoisie in crisis as it strives to maintain its dictatorship over the working class. While our exploiters would no doubt prefer to live in peaceful societies where obedient workers toil, live and die quietly, the intensification of the general economic crisis of capitalism compels them to resort to uglier and more brutal methods to preserve their class rule in the face of growing instability and unrest from the working class. To quote Dimitrov again, before the establishment of a fascist dictatorship, bourgeois governments usually pass through a number of preliminary stages and adopt a number of reactionary measures which directly facilitate the accession to power of fascism. Whoever does not fight the reactionary measures of the bourgeoisie and the growth of fascism at these preparatory stages is not in a position to prevent the victory of fascism, but on the contrary, facilitates that victory. When the situation reaches a breaking point, workers will either turn towards the fascists, who promise to solve the economic crisis by eliminating immigrants, Muslims, socialists, or other targets of fascist propaganda, or they will turn towards the socialists, who can actually solve the economic crisis by overthrowing the moribund system of imperialism. As anti-imperialists, we must redouble our efforts to recruit workers to their own side as the class struggle intensifies. We must join in with and involve as many people and organisations as possible in campaigns against the repressive and reactionary laws and actions taken by our imperialist governments. We must raise class consciousness so that the workers understand their real interests in this struggle. We must educate workers on the treacherous nature of social democracy, an agent of the enemy class within our movement. We must combat national chauvinism and promote proletarian internationalism. Imperialists have been sponsoring fascism across the world to overthrow socialist and independent nations. Now they are preparing the ground for fascism at home. Despite how powerful the imperialists may seem to be, they are in a deep crisis. Their economics, politics, philosophy and art are at a dead end. They have nothing real to offer the working class except misery and war. Despite how weak we anti-imperialists may seem in some countries, some parts of the world, we are part of a global movement that is winning. A progressive movement that is outstripping the imperialist world in every way, and we have everything to offer the working class. The struggle against fascism today is inseparable from the struggle against imperialism, and, like the struggle against imperialism, we must be united to be successful. Patria o muerte. Vemos. Socialism or barbarity. Thank you very much. I must apologise, but I thought there weren't enough speeches today, and the organisers have kindly allowed me to submit a resolution. we thought it was very important to talk about the repressive measures in Britain against anyone standing out, particularly against the genocide in Palestine and against the Zionist project. This resolution is not to engender pity or sympathy, although it's welcome. This is to illustrate the unity of our struggle, how the chains of imperialism bind all workers around the world, from Venezuela to Britain to Gaza, and that workers are fighting the same struggle. We submitted a resolution to the conference: stand with British workers who are being criminalised for opposing genocidal British imperialism. Since the heroic uprising of the oppressed Palestinian people in Gaza on the 7th of October 2023, the Palestinians have faced the full onslaught of the Zionist occupiers. This onslaught does not come only from the settlers who have seized Palestinian land, but is backed by the full force of NATO imperialism, especially by the military, economic, diplomatic and media machineries of the USA and Britain. Britain's Labour government, having enacted the Terrorism Act in 2003, has now used this law to ban a non-violent protest group, Palestine Action, for targeting the factories of Israeli weapons company Elbit, the banks that invest in Zionism, and planes used by the RAF as it participates in the ongoing genocide in Gaza with regular spy flights. None of these actions constitute terrorism, but British police are now making regular mass arrests of thousands of people who have been peacefully protesting against this ban, many of whom are elderly or disabled, and all of whom who are clearly not terrorists. Those arrested face a maximum sentence of 14 years in jail if the legal challenge to the ban does not succeed. In recent years, 7 of our own party comrades have been arrested on the spurious charges of hate speech, anti-Semitism and supporting terrorism. They spent the night in jail, had their family homes raided in the early hours of the morning, and their phones and computers were confiscated for months. They had the threat of those charges hanging over their heads for 6 months before the Crown Prosecution Service was forced to admit that there was no case to answer. Many professionals in Britain, including doctors, journalists, academics, have been targeted by Zionist organisations such as UK Lawyers for Israel, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and the Jewish Medical Association. Doctors have been spuriously reported to the General Medical Council, their livelihoods and their abilities to help their patients threatened. We recently reported on the case of Dr. Aradwan, who has been suspended from work, threatened with having her licence revoked, arrested by police and subjected to a slanderous campaign in the media and by Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who has received £30,000 from Zionist donors and who has promised to introduce the Zionist IHRA definition of anti-Semitism into the British Health Service to prevent medics there speaking out against the genocide. Our own party comrade Steve Sweeney, an RT journalist who was formerly based in Donbass and who now heads the Lebanon desk in Beirut, has also faced persecution. His bank accounts were frozen, and when he tried to visit family in Britain, he was detained at the borders and interrogated by SO-15.